In just 6 minutes, one audit report destroyed the EU's credibility forever. I've covered 31 parliament sessions. I've witnessed Brexit negotiations, budget battles, institutional crises. But what happened at 2:14 p.m. on October 22nd in Strasbourg wasn't just confrontation. It was systematic savaging of Ursula von der Leyen by a woman who had spent months building an irrefutable case of EU budget fraud. Kemi Badenoch walked into Strasbourg carrying a reinforced case with biometric locks. She looked like a forensic accountant who had assembled enough evidence to prosecute the largest financial fraud in European history. What none of us knew was that case contained audit documents exposing systematic misallocation of 80 million in EU funds. But she didn't reveal them immediately. The silence before destruction was unlike anything I'd witnessed. The chamber fell completely quiet. Not ceremonial parliamentary silence, but absolute quiet that comes when everyone knows they're about to witness institutional collapse. At 2:17 p.m., von der Leyen's budget advisor received an encrypted message. I watched her face transform from confident to terrified as she whispered something urgent in German. Von der Leyen's authority visibly wavered. Her EU audit liaison was frantically scrolling through emergency communications, looking like someone who knew the Commission's entire budget structure was about to be dismantled. And then Badenoch opened her case. President von der Leyen, she began, her voice carrying authority that silenced parliamentary interpreters, I want to discuss EU budget allocation processes and concerning financial irregularities brought to my attention through UK intelligence cooperation. Standard opening. Nothing threatening yet. Von der Leyen looked relieved, confident. Her Commission team were preparing usual responses about EU fiscal responsibility. But Badenoch's case was positioned with forensic precision, open to a tab marked with UK Treasury and European Court seals. This wasn't routine questioning. This was systematic prosecution. Madam Prime Minister von der Leyen replied in careful English, falling back on standard EU deflections. The Commission maintains highest standards of budget transparency within all established frameworks. Perfect institutional non-answer. But Badenoch wasn't interested in budget policy. I could see her building towards something devastating, like a forensic accountant with evidence to destroy an entire hierarchy. President von der Leyen, she said, removing a document with precision, are you familiar with the European Recovery Resilience Facility Coordination Office established in Luxembourg on April 3rd? The question hit the chamber like fiscal dynamite. Von der Leyen's expression didn't change immediately. But I watched her hands. They went still. When EU officials' hands stop moving during budget discussions, their survival instincts have activated. Madam Prime Minister von der Leyen replied, her voice maintaining institutional composure, but lacking her usual confidence. The Commission works with numerous coordinating bodies as part of our comprehensive approach to European recovery funding and fiscal coordination. Wrong answer. Institutionally catastrophic. When asked about a specific Luxembourg office, generic answers about recovery funding suggest massive cover-up. Badenoch pulled out a second document with European Court of Auditors, seals, and UK Treasury markings visible to cameras. President von der Leyen, she continued, her voice gaining momentum, according to these audit documents obtained through UK-EU cooperation, the Recovery Resilience Facility has processed 1,807 tons in EU recovery funds since 20. A shockwave rippled through parliamentary observers. 197 billion wasn't just significant. It represented nearly half the EU's entire recovery budget. But Badenoch was just beginning her systematic destruction. And President, she said, producing a third document with EU audit stamps and UK intelligence seals. These audit files show that only $34 billion of those funds ever reached their intended recipients in member states. The chamber went silent. Not parliamentary courtesy. This was parliamentarians processing information that could collapse institutional credibility and trigger criminal investigations across the EU. Von der Leyen's budget advisor leaned forward. Her training inadequate for allegations of this magnitude, her audit liaison stopped checking her tablet, staring at Badenoch with apocalyptic shock. But what happened next changed everything. Von der Leyen shot forward, her legendary composure evaporating. Madam Prime Minister, these allegations represent serious mischaracterization of legitimate EU recovery coordination processes. President von der Leyen, Badenoch, interrupted, her voice cutting through the protest like a blade. Are you denying that you personally signed authorization documents for $153 billion in recovery funds that have disappeared from official EU audit trails? Silence. Absolute, crushing silence. For exactly 16 seconds, I counted, von der Leyen said nothing. 16 seconds might not sound significant, but in high-stakes EU proceedings, 16 seconds equals confession. When she finally spoke, her voice had changed completely. The confident Commission president was gone, replaced by something I'd never heard, panic with a German accent. I signed numerous authorization documents as part of the Commission's recovery coordination responsibilities. I cannot recall every specific funding arrangement or coordination mechanism referenced. Devastating response. When a Commission president says, I cannot recall about 53 billion in missing recovery funds, it doesn't sound like administrative oversight. It sounds like systematic fraud. Badenoch opened her case one final time and removed what would become the smoking gun that ended von der Leyen's institutional leadership forever. President, she said, her voice now carrying absolute authority over the entire European structure. Perhaps this will help refresh your memory. She placed a high-resolution photograph on the podium, positioning it so every camera could capture the devastating evidence. The image showed von der Leyen with Klaus Schwab at an exclusive Davos meeting, with EU recovery documents visible between them. This photograph was taken by UK diplomatic intelligence at the World Economic Forum on January 23, 2023, the same week that $47 billion in EU recovery funds were transferred to coordination accounts that our auditors cannot trace. The timing was devastating. Same week, same location, same players. This wasn't EU recovery coordination. This was documented conspiracy to misallocate European taxpayer funds through untraceable networks. I watched von der Leyen's face drain of color. Her hands were now visibly shaking. Not nervousness, actual trembling visible to every camera. In the Commission monitoring room, her team was typing frantically on secure communications, sending emergency damage control instructions to every EU institution and member state across Europe. But Badenoch wasn't finished savaging her. President, she continued, producing another document with European Anti-Fraud Office seals. I also have here internal Commission communications showing you personally overruled EU audit recommendations that flagged the Recovery Resilience Facility as a potential fraud operation. At 2:24 p.m., exactly 6 minutes after she'd begun speaking, Ursula von der Leyen experienced complete institutional breakdown. Her voice was barely audible through parliamentary translation. Madam Prime Minister, these documents lack institutional context. European recovery requires complex coordination arrangements. She stopped mid-sentence. 23 seconds of silence. I've never seen a Commission president unable to complete a sentence during parliamentary proceedings. The silence was broken by Badenoch's calm, measured response. President, I'm not questioning European recovery needs. I'm questioning $53 billion in EU taxpayer funds that disappeared from official audit trails, while you claimed institutional transparency. The accusation hung in the chamber like poison. This wasn't just about budget policy anymore. This was about systematic betrayal of European taxpayers by their highest representative, who had secretly misallocated their recovery funds while claiming fiscal responsibility. Von der Leyen's advisor was whispering urgently in German, but even he seemed to recognize that standard damage control was inadequate for treason allegations of this magnitude. Furthermore, Badenoch continued, opening her final folder, UK Treasury analysis has confirmed that these missing EU recovery funds were systematically diverted to coordination accounts controlled by World Economic Forum entities throughout 2022. The expansion from mismanagement to systematic diversion demonstrated that this wasn't isolated fraud. This was systematic betrayal of European recovery, designed to benefit globalist institutions rather than European citizens. At 2:25 p.m., von der Leyen made the decision that effectively ended her institutional leadership of the European Commission. We will need to review these allegations with our institutional audit teams and provide appropriate responses through established Commission procedures. Wrong answer. Fatally wrong. When you're accused of systematically misallocating $53 billion in EU recovery funds, you don't promise to review allegations, you categorically deny or admit guilt. Promising procedural review sounds like you're buying time to destroy evidence. The parliamentary chamber erupted in chaos. EU member state representatives were frantically taking notes. German Chancellor Scholz's EU liaison was reportedly calling Berlin. French President Macron's European advisor was already discussing emergency commission replacement procedures. In the Brussels press room, EU correspondents were typing frantically. The European Political Review's correspondent was speaking urgently into her microphone. This could end von der Leyen's leadership. We're watching the collapse of EU budget credibility in real time. As the session concluded, I overheard urgent conversations in multiple European languages, confirming everyone's thoughts. Es ist vorbei. C'est terminé. È finita. It's finished. The $1553 billion EU budget fraud that Badenoch had just exposed wasn't just about recovery coordination or arrangements. It was about a European leader who had systematically betrayed European taxpayers to enrich globalist coordination networks, while European citizens suffered economic hardship. By 6:30 p.m., von der Leyen fraud was trending in 19 languages. By 7:15 p.m., the European Court of Auditors announced emergency investigations. By 8:00 p.m., 7 EU states demanded emergency Commission leadership reviews. Every major European publication ran wall-to-wall Recovery Gate coverage, connecting the Commission president to systematic misallocation of European recovery funds, and it all started with one diplomatic case, carried by a woman who had spent months building an unbreakable case against Europe's most trusted budget administrator. What I witnessed that afternoon wasn't just European procedure. It was the precise moment when audit evidence obliterated alliance, when documented fraud defeated procedural denial, and when one leader's forensic investigation systematically destroyed another leader's entire legacy. The European Parliament session continued for 2 more hours, but everyone knew the outcome had already been determined. Von der Leyen's influence over EU budget policy was finished. Her credibility on transparency was destroyed. The European Commission had shifted permanently away from German control. Sometimes institutional justice takes years through European courts. Sometimes it takes 6 minutes in a Strasbourg chamber. On October 22nd, I watched Kemi Badenoch prove that in European relations, forensic audit evidence always defeats procedural immunity. The only question was how much institutional damage the EU's budget fraud would do to European unity before the audit truth finished destroying von der Leyen's career. If this exposure of institutional corruption restored your faith in European accountability, don't just watch, like, share, and subscribe to our channel, where EU scandals get exposed and institutional lies get prosecuted, no matter which flag they hide behind. Hit the bell. The next institutional betrayal might involve your nation's European contributions. What would you do if you discovered your European leaders had been systematically stealing recovery funds during a crisis? Drop a comment below. This analysis is based on European parliamentary proceedings and institutional audit documentation. All dialogue and specific details are dramatized for educational and commentary purposes.